My name is Daryl Timmerman. I get the opportunity to serve on the board of directors here at Minnesota Pork, and I'm privileged with the opportunity here to introduce our next session. So Dr. Anna Forseth with the National Pork Producers Council is really focused on a lot of the traceability efforts. And so in short, traceability in the swine industry has been a topic of discussion for decades. Over the past 14 months, U.S. pork industry stakeholders have taken a more critical look at live swine traceability. Opportunities have been identified to improve the system and address the expectations of trading partners. Dr. Forseth will share current recommendations that will be considered by the delegate body at the 2024 National Pork Industry Forum. This is a proactive effort, and we hope that you will learn and engage in this discussion. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Anna Forseth from the National Pork Producers Council.
So I like to start these presentations on traceability with a slide highlighting 6 priorities that the joint boards of the National Pork Board and the National Pork Producers Council identified about 2 years ago now. And these are areas that they are looking for the industry to focus on regarding preparing for and planning for an African swine fever detection. You can see here on the list, point number 6, develop plans to expedite return to trade. There's a lot that goes into all of these priorities, but there's a lot that goes into this priority. When we talk with import-export staff about proactive discussions and regionalization agreements that will be needed to resume trade in the event of a foreign animal disease detection, there seems to be some common themes in those discussions. They ask a lot of questions about biosecurity, they ask a lot of questions about surveillance, and they ask a lot of questions about traceability. Traceability has been a topic of discussion in the industry for well over 20 years. This is not something new to our industry, certainly something that the industry has been proactive with for several years. But I think that there are some opportunities to improve our current live swine traceability system, and that's what we're focusing on right now. So in December of 2022, NPPC convened a group of about 30 people we called the Swine Traceability Task Force. This group represented the show pig industry. We had state veterinarians, federal veterinarians. We've got cull sow markets represented, the packing industry. Contract growers were there, larger integrators, smaller independent farms. And we asked them to review a set of traceability standards that were written back in 2011. And these standards, just for clarification, are opportunities to improve our live swine traceability system. So again, these were written 13, 14 years ago. They didn't go anywhere at that time, and at that time the effort was initiated by the government. For a few reasons, they didn't go anywhere, and so with ASF being kind of top of mind and these priorities being top of mind for the industry, we brought back these standards and are reprioritizing traceability. So we asked this group to review these standards, these opportunities that were identified in 2011, and ask them to review and identify what's still relevant, what other opportunities might there be to revise these standards to make them as practical as possible, but still meet the needs of our trading partners, with that being the focus. Some of these areas that we perceive to be as gaps and have perceived them as gaps for years are listed here on this slide. Movements to slaughter, in particular those through cull channels, so a big focus on cull sows and cull sow movements to slaughter. There was a lot of discussion about individual identification and different categories of swine that might warrant a higher level of traceability. These groups would be cull sows and exhibition swine who might not have a direct path from start to finish. They have a more complex path, especially those cull sows. I'll reference a bit later a study that was done following thousands of cull sows, and some of the information that they gathered regarding the number of miles traveled, the number of concentration points that those animals found themselves in before arriving to slaughter might surprise some people, and highlights the need for a more robust traceability system within that sector. So again, this individual identification point focuses on a couple of higher risk sectors in the industry. We talked about intrastate movements, and here I like to emphasize that what we're doing is focusing on the federal traceability requirements and rules. In the United States, I like to say it's a blessing and a curse regarding the authority that is the state veterinarian network, or states in general. Intrastate traceability and intrastate movements are regulated by the state. So movements that happen within a state don't necessarily apply to what we're doing here. Obviously, we'd like for there to be that crossover, and we'd like states to implement what we're doing, but this is focused at the federal level. And so when you think about states here in the Midwest that might have animals that are fed, finished, and slaughtered within the state, the traceability in that situation isn't all that great, because there might not be a requirement at the state level for those animals to be reported from a traceability perspective. Premises identification numbers. At this time, not all prems in the U.S. are required to have a PIN if they own swine. There are some states that mandate that, and that require that if you own pigs, you have to have a premises identification number, but that's not the case for all states. And that means that there are plenty of prems where pigs are present that we don't know about. That's not a solid talking point to go and talk with trading partners about. They don't like to hear that the United States doesn't know where all the pigs are. And so requiring PINs for any individual that owns pigs would be a pretty big deal. And then this idea of movement reporting to a centralized database is a huge component of what we're doing here. We're going to talk about all these in a little bit more detail. But allowing state and federal authorities to have access to movement data during a time of need in one location can help significantly with the timeliness of the response, and is also an important selling point to our trading partners. So in the back of your mind, as we go through some of the details of what these standards say, keep that in mind. This is information that is primarily designed to meet the needs of trading partners. Once we get a detection of African swine fever, classical swine fever, or foot and mouth disease, as a reminder, our export markets close, with between 25 to 30% of domestic production exported, and a current value of $61 a head attributable to our export market. It's a significant opportunity to do what we can proactively to meet the anticipated needs of these trading partners now. This is years in the making, and this is going to be years before implementation should we get industry support at Pork Forum. It's not a quick process, so doing it now is pretty critical. So the next couple of slides are going to summarize where this task force landed regarding recommendations. So if there are a couple of slides to pay attention to, these next two slides would be them. Again, we have spent, I think, 14 months reviewing these standards. There was a tiered revision process where we would make the standard, the draft of the standard at the time, publicly available, ask for industry input, and then we would gather our task force and ask them to review and consider feedback. The standards would be revised, and then we would recirculate that new draft, and we did that 3 times. We reviewed many, many comments, and I will say that the version of the standards that we started with and the version of the standards that we have today are very different. Importantly, the feedback was focused on what's practical, what's cost effective, but also what is still going to allow us to meet the needs of the trading partners. So keep that in mind. Again, while the focus is on trade, I would be remiss to say that there's not also going to be a benefit to these improvements to state and federal health authorities' ability to manage the disease better and more effectively. So a better traceability system is going to allow them to get a hold of the situation quicker, and that in turn is going to help us assure our trading partners that we've got the situation under control, and then hopefully get back to trade sooner. So let's review. There's eight points. If I had to pull this 7-page standards document down, I was able to put it into eight primary points. The first requirement within these standards, as I had mentioned earlier, would be that all swine owners would need a premises identification number. The second requirement would be that when swine or semen are moved, that movement needs to be recorded by both the sending and the receiving prem. And it would be a consistent set of data. So if I am sending a group of hogs to Dr. Geske, I would be required to record the date of the movement, the type of animal or semen that's moved, my prem number, his prem number, and if there's any official ID numbers present, that information also needs to be recorded. He would be required to do the same. Where that happens is at this time up to the producer. It needs to be recorded electronically, and that can be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. It could be a MetaFarms database, a Pignose database, EggView, but it could be as simple as an Excel spreadsheet. It has to be done electronically, and it has to be done within 3 business days. So again, anytime pigs are moved, whether it's within your production system or outside of, whether it's to slaughter, whether it's across state lines or within the state, whether it's a show pig that's going to the county fair or a jackpot show and coming home, each time that animal moves, that information is recorded by the sending and receiving producer. Following the detection of a trade-limiting disease, so African swine fever, classical swine fever, foot and mouth disease, that same data set that's required to be recorded is then reported to a centralized location. And we talked about that a little earlier, the benefits of having all of that information accessible to the people that need it in one spot would be a big benefit. So following the detection of a trade-limiting disease, that information is recorded but then reported to this centralized location. The next point 5 here on the slide, when breeding swine are moved either to slaughter, commingled with animals outside of the production system, or are sold, they would be required to have a radio frequency AIN tag. AIN stands for Animal Identification Number. It is a unique 15-digit federally issued ID that no other animal has. Think of it like a social security number for that animal. And again, we identified a couple of categories of swine where they're higher risk from a traceability perspective based on their movements. And those would be 0.5 breeding swine and 0.6 show and exhibition stock. So these are the 2 categories that would be required to have an RFID AIN tag. I cannot tell you how much time was spent on this discussion, both which animals need to be tagged, but more importantly, the radio frequency technology, ultimately, the decision was that the value that comes with the radio frequency and the efficiency of reading those tags, there's really no other way to do it. If we're requiring the coal markets and the slaughter facilities to record official IDs, the only way they can do that is with a radio frequency technology. They can't physically read those tags of animals coming through. So a lot of feedback, a lot of pushback, but ultimately the decision that was made by the task force was to require this tag type for these two groups of swine. For semen, the requirement would be that a label is affixed to each dose with the pin of the source herd. And then the last point regarding coal markets and packing plants and animals that are reshipped or resold, the tattoo number applied to the animals prior to that animal leaving that facility would have to be unique to that facility. There have been a couple of recent traceback situations that have not been as easy for animal health officials because within one slaughter plant company, maybe they don't have a unique enough tattoo numbering system, and so there are multiple animals in the channel with the same tattoo number, and traceback wasn't possible or wasn't as easy as it should have been. So we talked about tagging these animals and got pushback from the coal markets and the packing plants that we're not going to tag animals, and so we agreed to a more unique tattoo numbering system. Yes, was when the tags are purchased, when the RFID tags are purchased with these 840 numbers, they're tied to a PIN number. That will transfer. You will not. It's actually illegal to change that AIN number or change that tag. Once it's physically applied to the animal, it stays with that animal. So the 840 numbers, those social security numbers, can transfer from a new owner to new owner. Yes, yes. The question was if the gilt is tagged at birth, that's her number, and that's correct. That's her number for her life. So I want you all to know there's going to be a lot of time for questions and discussion. I am seeing some maybe expressions from what I just presented. I anticipate that there might be some feedback, and that I'm prepared for that. Again, really wanting to emphasize why we're doing this, and we've tried to make this point as clear as the what of these standards. The why of what we're doing here is so important for people to understand. This is not the best time to be asking producers to do more. Not the best time to be asking producers to spend more money. That's why this is so important for people to understand the timeliness of this discussion and this effort, given the situation with African swine fever. We need this to have these conversations with trading partners to better assure ourselves resumption of trade post-outbreak. Again, there are going to be domestic benefits to a more robust traceability system. While that's not the focus, it's also important that people understand that there's this, I don't even want to call it a secondary benefit, because it is equally important that we're able to control and manage this disease within our borders, and this traceability improvement is going to help with that. But the focus of this effort and the reason we're doing this in the first place is really focused on trade. So again, these standards will be presented as a resolution at Pork Forum, which is the first week in March. We will ask the delegates to vote in support of the standards. If they support them, we will submit them to USDA for consideration to implement into their current code of federal regulation, the current traceability system. We are submitting a recommendation to USDA, and that's important that people understand that. It's ultimately up to USDA to decide what version of what we submit they implement. NPPC has a very good working relationship with USDA. Talk with them multiple times a week, have been talking with them for months about this effort. We did have USDA participation in this process as well, but there is kind of this caveat that what I've presented and what the standards say, if you access them, isn't necessarily carbon copy to what is going to be implemented should industry support this. Once the standards are provided to USDA, should we have that opportunity, it's a long process. By no means will producers be asked to implement these practices in April of this year if they're passed in March. This is a minimum of 3 years to implementation. There's rule writing, there's comment periods, and there's just working with the government. It just takes a long time. And so keeping that in mind is important as well, because what the industry looks like 3 years from now might be quite different to now. But it's not going to happen quickly. So this QR code, and if you don't do QR codes, I'm happy to get them to you a different way. These standards are available to anyone. Happy to provide them to you. As I said, it's about a 7-page Word document. You're welcome to read through them. I think that the 8 points that I provided is a pretty good summary of what these standards say. For this audience, you should know that during the annual meeting on Monday, Minnesota did support the standards as a state. And so when this resolution is presented at Pork Forum, at this time, we've got support from the states of Minnesota, Ohio, and Kentucky, as well as NPPC's Animal Health Committee and our Trade Committee. So there are additional states that have yet to have their annual meetings or have expressed interest, and so we expect that there will be additional states added to the list. But again, are happy with this support, continue to get questions, and that's a good thing. This discussion is important. It's critical that producers understand what this means, why we're doing it, and how it would impact them. There are several folks in the room that participated in the task force in smaller group breakouts that we had on our Animal Health Committee, and so I'm going to pause at this time for questions. I do have some prepared, like commonly asked questions, if we have time. I just want to make sure everybody's got as much information leaving today as possible. But if there are folks in the room that have participated on the task force or our committee and want to offer some input from your perspective, from a Minnesota producer's perspective, I'd be more than happy to have you share some of your thoughts as well. So I'll pause there, and anybody have anything to offer who's participated? If not, now's our Q&A session. So. Point number 8. You bet. So the question was to elaborate on point number 8. And so animals that are coming through an assembly point or packing plants that are either reshipped or resold from packing, or maybe go from one coal market to another, warrant a form of identification that would tie them to that location at that time. So if a market hog comes into a coal plant and then goes on to slaughter with no form of identification, there's no way that we could tie that particular animal back to that coal plant or that buying station without some form of ID. Similarly, if we've got animals that need to be reshipped from a packer back to a buying station or from one packer to another, if there isn't a form of ID applied to that animal, then there's no way to tie that animal back to that location, back to that point. It's all about a record trail to get an animal from their point of slaughter back through the path that they took to get there and ultimately back to their prem of origin. And so animals that aren't required to have this unique ID, how else are we going to be able to track them or trace them through that path? And so the focus of point number 8 was again on these tattoo numbers. So the example that was used during the task force meeting was a system similar to like airport codes. So a harvest facility would have maybe a 2-digit alpha code and then would have the remaining 2 or 3 digits to track the lots, the same that they have always done. But it's that 2-digit alpha code that would allow an animal health official to know where that animal was should they present with lesions and a trace path. If it went to 2 different places, it would have 2 different tattoos. And so we've talked about that a lot. And that isn't ideal. And if you're not collecting both of those tattoo numbers at slaughter, what's the point? And, you know, some of this is just going to be an education process. But that's the compromise to individually tagging these animals that run through the coal channel. I would say in regards to the details of these standards, other than costs of the RFID tags, a majority of this discussion has been around when producers report their data and where it goes. And so at this time, the standards say that producers are to essentially record their data and they can hold on to it. It just needs to be done in a timely manner, right? So I'm recording into my Excel spreadsheet if that's what I want to use, these consistent data points. If I'm audited, I can show you that I'm doing this when I need to and the data is what I need to record. For several months, the standards would have required producers to report that data to a centralized location even in peacetime. And there was a lot of discussion about benefits to that, but ultimately the task force decided that at this time, we didn't want to ask producers to send that information to that centralized location until a time of need. So to summarize, yes, cost, and we can talk about that more, but this idea of a centralized repository and all data going to it was another kind of sticking point in the discussion. Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, good question. So in that scenario where animals have maybe left the farm, gone to a packing plant, but they're reshipped from that packing plant either to another plant or to another assembly point, it would be the requirement of that packing plant to report, I sent these animals with this tattoo number on this date to this location. So the PIN, the prem, where the animals left, it's the requirement of that prem. It's not the requirement of the owner of the original owner of the animals. Other questions? not to put anybody on the spot, but this would be a great time if anybody who participated wanted to say anything. If not, I'm happy to throw up. I think we've got.
I just want to reiterate a few things that Dr. Forseth said. First of all, to compliment her on the work that was done. This is not an easy task when you have producers, you have packers, you have the secondary markets, you have this exhibit show world there. It wasn't an easy process, but I will say, and you referenced it earlier, there was a lot of discussion. So all through this, if there was an area where there was, maybe some concerns, and not just the cost, but I think the time and effort to do that too, because that came out too from a lot of independent producers like, wow, I can barely get this done. I don't have a person that's dedicated doing records. I'm gonna have to do it myself. So all of that was heard. I just want to iterate how much time and effort and conversations were spent on this whole process. So that's good, but obviously, like Dr. Forseth said, we'll be addressing this again at forum. So if you do have questions between now and then, make sure that you get them to NPPC or a board member or anyone like that, because we really do want there to be a lot of discussion so that we've addressed all the critical points.
Yeah, I think I was on the task force and we're participants, and I can back Lori on the amount of discussion they had. I was involved in many hours of that, either during meeting time or after meeting time or between meeting times. It was very intense, and I think what's impossible to do is find a one-size-fits-all solution for the industry, and we're not there. We don't have it perfect. But we also saw in 2020 what can happen when our market shuts down, and so I think it is a little more work, but when we can move pigs a lot quicker after an outbreak or in bad times by regionalization, it's probably worth doing. And I'm not here to sell any products, but I don't know if you use a software company for your records. Ours does it, and it goes into AgView automatically. So once we enter it in once, which we were doing anyways, it continues to go in. There's data privacy issues that people are worried about throughout the nation. I mean, that's what's going to, I think, be a tough part of everything. But we can't let very small details wreck the greater good of the program. So we're supportive. If you have questions from a producer perspective, I'd be glad to answer them.
The question was whether or not AgView can pull the records, the data that's pulled from the RFID tags. Yes, theoretically, there's a pilot project in place to evaluate that data collection from these RFID tags from prem of origin through the coal markets to the slaughter establishment to confirm. But to throw up a few things, I think these are important additional points to make. So we talked about the reservations that might be more common as we have been discussing these standards over the last several months. Obviously, the cost of the tags and tag availability. I'm sure there are several people in this room that were victim to the back-ordered pin tags, and so that's on the top of a lot of people's minds. We have been in conversation with the tag manufacturers, and to the best of their ability, I've gotten assurances that, especially considering that this is years out in the making, that there's an opportunity to ramp up that manufacturing process to make sure we've got what we need when there might be a requirement in place for producers. So regarding tag cost, I did want to let you all know about a proposal that is in the works through USDA, and I want to reference a program in the cattle industry. So since I think about 2018, USDA has been providing RFID tags to the cattle industry with the goal to improve and encourage and introduce this technology into that industry to ultimately improve traceability. So a number of all states, I believe, were given tags based on percentage of the population of cattle in their state relative to the others, and the requirement was that these tags be used in replacement breeding stock, so they were for heifers. They have provided millions of RFID tags to the cattle industry at no cost to the producer, and that has been very well received. And they have also since offered funds to implement and purchase the infrastructure required to collect this data. So wands, readers, panel readers at markets, that sort of thing. So for going on 6 years now, USDA has been working with the cattle industry to get this technology introduced and accepted more. They're interested in doing something similar for the pork industry. This obviously comes at a good time, and the proposal is for over a 5-year period. In total, around 13 million tags would be provided, RFID 840 series tags, so these 15-digit tags that would be a requirement through these standards would be made available to the industry. About 75% of those tags would be allocated to the commercial sector, and then a quarter of them would be designated for the exhibition and show industries. They've identified higher risk populations as we have, and they're consistent, so targeting that cull sow population, targeting those reshipped animals, though I'm not saying we're going to put tags in reships, but there are some areas where they might focus their efforts on who gets these tags, which concentration points get these panel readers, but just want to make everybody aware of this opportunity we hope to hear more about soon. That might mean that USDA is going to make available free RFID tags. So I think that would be a helpful transition, especially at this time, these current market conditions. Obviously voluntary, no one has to take these tags or use these tags, but if you've got the wand reader and can make use of the data, it might be something of interest to a lot of producers and a lot of these assembly points. Regarding the database, we talked about that a little bit. There is not, if you read the standards, there is not a specific database that's mentioned. Frankly, I don't think we're ready to name a database. I do like to highlight AgView as an option as a database. I think just for producers to try to conceptualize what a database would look like, AgView can do what we would ask of a centralized database. So for those of you who are familiar with that database, it might help with your understanding of what this means to think about that product or that software. But you won't see AgView mentioned, you won't see any other database mentioned. Instead, you'll see a list of capabilities and functions that the database needs to have to meet the needs of this centralized repository. I think that over the next few years, should this all pass and get support from Forum, and should we start down this process of rule writing with USDA, I think within that 3-year period that we anticipate, there will be an opportunity for industry to identify and endorse and support a database. Ultimately, I think that needs to happen. There needs to be one that is considered the centralized database. And again, because we'll have several years between introduction and implementation, it would be appropriate for industry to talk more about this centralized database concept and identify and endorse one that they would like to see USDA use. That comes with a lot of questions. There's a lot that goes into that, which is why it's good to maybe save that for another year. I wouldn't be surprised if that occupied as much time, just that one topic and discussion alone. So we'll see where that conversation goes, but just for awareness, for those of you who might read these standards, that's why you won't see a specific database mentioned. The exhibition industry, I just wanted to highlight this. It surprised a lot of people. I don't know how many in this room are involved in the exhibition industry, and I know that there's variation, but the traceability requirements that they impose upon themselves would impress a lot of us, and did impress a lot of us. The requirement for 840 series tags, as an example, to show, not necessarily a requirement by a state veterinarian or a federal requirement by any means, but the requirements that that industry imposes upon themselves puts them at a kind of a different level, to be honest, on the traceability side. So us telling the traceability, or telling the exhibition industry that they would have to use 840 series RFID tags, didn't react too much to that. We're already doing that. So we appreciated and valued their participation in this task force, but there certainly wasn't as much of an emphasis or as much time spent on that industry because of what they're already doing. Reporting requirements, the 3 business days. This is an interesting discussion because if you talk to USDA, they'll tell you 72 hours is not long, or is too long. They would like it quicker. The producers in the room, it was initially 72 hours, said that, well, if that's over a weekend or if that's over a holiday, that's not long enough. It doesn't match up necessarily with the amount of time that it might take for us to get our data back from a packer. We use that data, and so we wouldn't, we'd prefer not to enter it twice. So ultimately, we decided on 3 business days within the task force, but just for awareness, there was some discussion on this reporting requirement and the time that would be allowed for a producer to get these records recorded. PIN versus AIN tag, hopefully that's clear enough for folks. That premises identification number is highly implemented. This is, as many of you know, a standard that industry kind of implemented or imposed upon ourselves. But there are limitations with a PIN number. You can have 1,000 sows that have that same PIN number that don't have the same path from point of origin to slaughter. And so from a traceback perspective, that's not as valuable if that one animal might have a more complex path. And at the end of the road, you can't, from a data traceability perspective, you can't tell her apart from the other 1,000. And so that's where this unique 15-digit number really can be of benefit for that group of animals. And then the last comment I'll make, and then I'll pause and see if there are any additional questions. There was a recent visit, farm audit, I think in November. A group from Japan came and toured a farm in Iowa, a packing plant in Iowa. They also went to Puerto Rico and heard about and toured some different spots to learn more about the protection zone that's in place in Puerto Rico. This is years in the making, and is an example of this pre-negotiation process that USDA has with trading partners. It started with a questionnaire. Japan provided the import-export staff at USDA with a 20-page list of questions. And again, I mentioned earlier that a lot of those questions focused on what's our surveillance program like for ASF? What are the biosecurity requirements that are used in the commercial sector? They asked a lot of questions about feral swine. Probably a surprise to some, but not a surprise to others. And then a lot of questions about traceability. During the visit, both on-site as well as in the plant, a lot of questions asked about traceability. And so I think that further emphasizes what we're doing here and why we're doing it. Rob Brenneman has been very public that the visit was at Brenneman Pork, and I think is happy to talk with anybody about that experience. I think he was very happy with how it went, was very happy to be involved, and is a big proponent of this effort. And I think that, again, that experience highlights what we're doing here, because there was reference to what we're doing to answer some of those questions. Question, not yet, but I do know that there are proposals that are in place either at the state level or maybe with a show or an organization to look into that. So a lot of them are looking at EggView and are trying to identify more opportunities for EggView to be utilized within that sector and collecting the data that's Prem ID numbers, AIN tag numbers, but that's in the works definitely. All right, well, if you didn't catch the QR code and you're interested, feel free to catch me, talk with Jill or other staff members here. These standards are available to everyone. I encourage you to have a look at them, but appreciate the support from Minnesota during the annual meeting and really look forward to see what happens at Pork Forum. So I hope next year maybe we're back talking more about database, but on the road to improving our live swine traceability. So if there aren't any other questions, I was told that my moderator had to catch another meeting, so I am to thank you for being here and excuse you, but I think we'll close there. Thank you.